Marketing for doing this free podcast. Started out just 4 or 5 months ago, and you can go back and listen to other episodes. But we have almost 500 people that are listening to this podcast each month. So we started 4, 5, 6 months ago, something like that. So it's pretty cool. I have always been fascinated by this, and my passion has always been the business of what we do and teaching it. And my fellows get to listen to this all the time. But I think it behooves us to become students of business, balance, and avoiding burnout. And I think it's to me, it's a fascinating topic. And I think that we, as physicians and as entrepreneurs, are very high risk. And there's some things that we can actually do to avoid it. I've got other topics coming up. So my next one is on July 18th. My guest, I don't have it confirmed yet, is Alex Thirst, who is an attorney. He's the founder and director of the American Med Spa Association. And the reason I'm having him is because last month I spoke about how to scale up your practice with nurse injectors. And as you know, there's a lot of legal implications of doing that. And there's a lot of confusion around it. And this gentleman basically knows the rules in every single state. And I've got a lot of tough questions to ask him. But, I've had colleagues of mine say, oh, it's not a big deal. I've got a nurse, an LPN running the hair removal laser. And yeah, I know in this state, it's not, technically I have to have a registered nurse, but she's been doing it for 10 years. It's not a problem until it's a problem. One of my colleagues spent over $100,000 with OPMC, Office of Medical Misconduct. It's all okay until you have a disgruntled employer or disgruntled patient or something along those lines. So this should be a fascinating interview. If I don't, he agreed to it, but he just didn't confirm the date. If that doesn't go, we're going to talk about how to do effective strategic planning session using specific tools to grow your practice. And the old saying, if you don't, we don't fail to plan to fail, we just fail to plan. And there's so many of us that don't really have a plan in our business. We just react to the business. So again, thank you, Equitable Marketing. Anyone who has questions, send us questions. I'd like feedback as well. There's a Facebook group that has been started by Equitable Marketing. I think it's like the aesthetic business of aesthetics. They're going to post from time to time some information there. I actually just finished writing a book on the business of aesthetic medicine and a whole variety of chapters in there that will be kind of cool. And I have a website now, dredwinwilliams.com. I have all kinds of blogs and information there. We don't have a name for the book that I'm publishing, but it's going to be, I've kicked a bunch of them around, but just because you have a white coat doesn't mean you have a black belt in business or finance or something like that. But so many physicians don't really take the time to work on their business. And of course, this is my passion. So what I want to talk about today is, work-life balance and avoiding burnout. And, it's interesting for physicians, we work our rear ends off in our training and we don't really think about it. I had one of our patient concierge, patient care coordinators, whatever you want to call them, about a month ago, wanted to rework her schedule so there's a little bit more work-life balance. And she was really trying to work so that she was, only here a half a day on Friday. Meanwhile, she only works, 38 hours. Physicians are used to killing themselves. We go through our training. So for us, work-life balance means something entirely different because many of us really, do burn out. And when you look at the statistics, it's kind of frightening depending on what you read. We just actually did a survey and a study of our members. At any one time, question physicians, about 70% of them will say they've had a time when they felt burned out. If you query physicians and say, do you feel burned out right now? Somewhere between 40 to 60% of physicians say they feel burned out. And that's, when you think of it, one in every two, that's a terrible thing. So there's a few truisms that I believe, in as far as burnout and work-life balance, that they're really important to talk about. And one of them is, I've had 3 Mormon fellows and these guys get it, when it comes to their family. And I'm fortunate because I think I do too. And one of them said to me that, no success at work justifies a failure at home. And I think about that because, you know, one of my staff over the years, people would say to me, I can't believe you like work your entire schedule around your kids and your family. And my kids are older now, but I did. And I used to jokingly say, you know, it's cheaper than, you know, rehab, you know, for your kids, which is $250,000 and it doesn't always work. So, you know, I think it's really important that we do, because when you look at the failures at home, whether it's, you know, in a marriage or a, you know, a child, and by the way, there's no secret formula there, but when someone does go through that, it gives you gray hair. I mean, it takes a lot out of you. What is, you know, we're not just talking financial cost. Arianna Huffington said, and I like this quote of hers, it says, "We think mistakenly that success is the result of the amount of time we put into work instead of the quality of the time we put in." And I had two really good mentors along those lines. My first mentor was Dr. Eugene Tardy, which some of the people on the call, of course, know who he was. But Dr. Tardy was a fanatic with his efficiency. I mean, he would literally be finishing a case and he would be telling Mary Ellen, the scrub nurse, you know, what instruments she needed to pack for his trip the next day. I mean, and I also had another friend of mine who sold a publicly traded company, and you know, he had 1,000 employees at one point, and I saw how organized he was, and he wasn't working. I mean, he worked long days, but he wasn't spending evenings on the phone talking to staff and you know, or weekends. And I have been somewhat of a fanatic about my time that way, making sure that my time with my family was uninterrupted. And you know, the problem with those of us that are entrepreneurs, if you want to call it that, because that's what we are, those of us that are, you know, run our own business, is, you know, I am not in my office or building after 5:30, you know, every day. I don't work weekends. I won't see patients in the evening. And you know, I'm fortunate to have a fellow, so they take a lot of the call. But those of us who are entrepreneurs are working a lot in our head. You know, whether it's just part of our genetic makeup and part of our chemistry. But you know, it's important to be present, you know, for your family. And so in 1974, there was an author called Freudenberger, which is really apparently the first time that this word burnout, and I think they wrote a piece something called the high cost of achievement, burnout, the high cost of achievement. So really people didn't talk about it until, you know, the 70s. Prior to that, they were just looking to get by, right? But burnout is really this cycle of exhaustion, recover, exhaustion, and recover. And those of us who've gone through a residency can relate to this, right? I mean, we know from our surgical training, you know, you're exhausted, you come home, you pass out, and then you recover. Burnout is when you really don't recover, you know, well, and from that, and you get to a point where there's some things that are happening to you psychologically. We had a family physician recently who's 38 years old. Her husband's an ophthalmologist, and she just quit medicine. And I was talking to her because I'm like, I'm fascinated by this. So, you know, clearly this is a problem in medicine. And she said, you know what, Ed? She goes, I'm done. She goes, I'm done with the meaningful use bullshit. I'm done with the ICD-10s, the denials. And, you know, when I asked her how she feels, you know, she really fits that profile. And so there are a few things that happen when you fit into that category. And I'll tell you, I've felt it from time to time. And I'm going to share with you what I do. But, you know, you find you're physically and emotionally exhausted. And what do I mean by that? You know, you no longer get excited to do certain things. You know, like, for example, you're not popping up in the morning and ready to, you know, excited to go to work. You know, we think back on the phase when we were in a residency, we're just so excited to do these cases. Or you're waking up at 3 or 4 in the morning and you can't get back to sleep. But so there's physical and emotional exhaustion. And then the other symptom they talk about is, you know, depersonalization, where you can kind of get callous, callous attitude towards your patients, or cynical. And you start to become not caring. And I think about it because it's like, you know, now and then, and we can all relate to this, those of us who've been in practice for a while, you come out of a room and you got someone who's got a great result, you know, from a facelift or something. And they say, you know, I just had no idea that the recovery was going to be like this. And, you make some comment, to your nurse, geez, if I was writing a check for $15,000, I think something real would be happening, right? I mean, yeah, there's a recovery here. I mean, what were you thinking? We don't sugarcoat it. And you find yourself, with this deeper personalization becoming, sarcastic. And I think anyone who listens to this, who's been a busy surgeon or a busy doctor for years, can sometimes relate to some of these things, becoming exhausted, getting a little sarcastic or dismissive. I mean, how many times can we, would be dismissive to a patient and quote, blow them off. And so that's the second. And then the third symptom is really kind of starting to develop a reduced sense of accomplishment. I think back at the days when, the first 10 years of my practice, I think I did 100 forehead flaps, right? So it was probably one every month or so. And I'd be taking these, put these noses together and you're sewing all this cartilage and you're turning a forehead flap and you'd fuss on them and it'd be all day. And I'd come out of the operating room high, right? I mean, I'd come out like high or jacked up. And same thing with these long trauma cases, you're harvesting calvareal bone and you're putting all these plates on, you get all this exposure. And there's a point where it's just not exciting anymore. You lose your sense of accomplishment. And it's kind of sad in some ways, but it happens. And so, it is important not to live your life like that. And I do know, a lot of physicians do get to that point. And so, burnout can be this continuum where on one side you've got total engagement and the other end it's total burnout. And there are a lot of us that kind of go back and forth, with a very busy career. And as I mentioned, studies are anywhere between 40 to 60% of physicians say at one time they feel burned out. That's terrible when you think about it. Almost 1 in 2 or 1 in 3 docs are feeling, burned out. 70% say they've experienced burnout in the past. So, why are doctors different? I clearly not 1 in 2 or 1 in 3 people who have other careers are feeling, burned out, right? And so, what is the cost of this? Well, doctors do have a 30 or 40 year career. So it's important for us to not be burned out if we want to continue to be productive and fulfilled and happy, right? And not just walk away and retire. But it is a little bit of an uphill battle, for physicians. And so there are several reasons. I mean, let's face it. I started to really research this. I'm like, wow, yep, that one's another one. It's a stressful job. Right? I mean, there's no question. I mean, take a look at what a lot of people do. We have a stressful job. What is stress to me? Well, it's trying to be in 2 places at one time. In my earlier years, I'd be getting a call from one OR or from one ER, and I'm still in the OR somewhere. That to me is stressful. Other stressful parts of the job is, we can't necessarily always control our outcome. You can do a facelift and do a facelift and do another facelift, and then all of a sudden you get this massive hematoma at 10 o'clock at night, or, someone has a complication, and those things are they just make our job stressful, right? So 1, stressful. 2 is it's difficult for a lot of us to separate our work and our life. I mean, if you took a lot of professions, people typically, they leave work, they go home and they forget about work. I don't know about most people on this call, but I suspect a lot of them are like me. I don't really have call any longer because I've got someone fellow who takes it, but I think about the business a lot. We worry about our patients. I worry a lot less about my patients now just because I got thicker skin. I've been doing this for years. And I think that also I'm a little more selective. When you're in your earlier years, I would always say any one time, there's always one person that's kind of hanging out there thinking about, So it's hard to separate our work-life balance. So that's a second, reason it puts us at high risk. Our patients are either sick or they potentially needy. I mean, think about who goes to the doctor. I mean, anyone who's listening to this call is not someone who's running to the doctor all the time, but there are those people that visit. So if you're dealing with functional medicine, so for example, dermatology, ENT, you're dealing with people who have problems and they're sick and they're needy. Those of us who are in the aesthetic business also have patients that are needy, and so our customer is not just a transaction. They can typically be someone who's needy. So that's 1, 2, 3. 4, I mentioned this before. It's not just being in two places, but we try to stay on time. Those of us who would try to really respect our patients' time, try to stay on time, and that's stressful. You're trying to stay on time in the operating room. You're trying to stay on time with your patients. You're constantly looking at your watch. I realized this the other day. I was doing a facelift, and I have a daughter. One of my daughters is an ophthalmology resident. I have another daughter who thinks she might want to go in medicine. So I said, well, you better come watch some surgery. Come watch. She's never seen surgery. She's going to watch my partner and watch me. And I'm in the operating room, and I thought of this for a moment as I'm doing this facelift. I'm just being myself, what I normally do, and my daughter's seeing me in a way she's never really seen me. But I'm watching the clock. I'm keeping an eye on the clock, and and I'm moving along, and you're kind of, not I don't want to say pushing the system, but we're on. You got game on. If you're in an operating room all day, it's game on. I mean, I don't, I respect my patients, so I don't take phone calls. I don't, we have chitter chatter, chit chat in the operating room, we talk, but I'm constantly on. I mean, how many jobs where you're on and you're clocked in and you're on? So, trying to stay on time is also something that, makes the job stressful. Number 5, when you look at these things that are high risks for burnout, another category is those people who are, quote, high job fit or extremely vested. Now, what does that mean? Well, we're vested big time. I mean, we go through 12, 13 years of education training to do what we're doing. I got friends of mine. Actually a buddy of mine texted me last week. He goes, what do you want to do tomorrow? I'm like, I don't know. What do you want to do? He goes, I'm unemployed. I just sold my company. So I got together with him. I said, what do you? He goes, I don't know. I got to figure out something to do. We don't typically go down that road where we just change gears. Why? Because we're so vested. So why does that tie into burnout? Well, the reason it turns into burnout is because we took years and years. We are so vested in this. It's not like we're going to say, well, I'm not really enjoying my job or career, so I'm going to quit and do something else. It's another very high risk factor for burnout, is being extremely vested. 2 is that our item number 6 is a lot of leaders or doctors are just not good leaders. And quite frankly, doctors aren't trained to be leaders. And so we can have the stress associated with running a business or building a team when we don't understand that. The AMA, and I'm not going to pick on the AMA completely, but I'm going to pick on them a little bit. They have this, leadership training, but it's top-down leadership. It's not real leadership, how to build a team. And I think that one advice I could give to anyone who's seriously thinking about running their own business is get good leadership training and become a student of leadership your whole life. Because if you get one thing right, if you want to add more to your financially to your bottom line, it's become a better leader. But when you're not a good leader, it's stressful because you don't know what you're doing. I'll give an example. In my early years, I was in practice a few years, and I have, you have these employees of yours, and I didn't know how to deal with this. But all of a sudden, you're like, it's 5 o'clock. You've been busting ass all day. You're in the OR at 7:30, and you get up to the little thing where the messages are, and it's Dr. Williams. If you have 5 minutes, can I talk to you at the end of today? And I can just feel like the hair going up on the back of my neck. Really, what are we going to talk about today? They're not happy, but we don't understand how to run a business because we're not good leaders. And so, that's another thing that contributes to stress. So I've gone through a bunch of these financial considerations. If we're running our own business, the financial considerations, there's 2 sides of it. There's one, those of us who are practicing functional medicine, are trying to deliver, value and frustration along the lines of, ICD-10s and pre-approvals, those things, because they obviously financially impact the bottom line. If you didn't give a damn about the finances of making payroll, it wouldn't matter. Or the other financial considerations of making sure you're delivering value to patients. You know, you have a patient who's written a check for a cosmetic procedure and, you know, I'm not happy. I don't really see the results that I thought I was getting. So there's the, you know, the financial piece of it, compliance, paperwork, all of those. And those, my colleagues who were doing more functional medicine, I can't even imagine what they deal with now as far as the financial or the compliance nonsense and the regulatory crap that they have to deal with, as well as the paperwork and documentation. You know, so when you start to look at this list of things that are put us at high risk for burnout, it's not a surprise. You know, we also have malpractice to deal with. Now, in the early years, I mean, I have much thicker skin right now. And, you know, I had someone, I don't know, whatever, a few months ago threatened to sue me. And I'm like, yeah, fine, go for it, man. But, you know, when you're a young doctor, this is scary stuff, medical malpractice. I was in practice for probably 7 or 8 years. I had a woman sue me. It took 2 years to go to court. You go through depositions. This stuff hangs over you. Anyone who's been there is a seasoned folk with enough gray hair like I do. It hangs over you. You know, and I remember with the attorneys in the deposition saying to me, come on, doc, you know, lighten up, something like that. And I said, well, you know, because it was at the break, you know, we're off the record now. Come on, doc, you know, this is just a lawsuit. And I'm like, yeah, I'm glad you think, you know, you look at it that way. We take this stuff very personally, right? I spent a month in court, won the case. And I remember walking out of court that day thinking to myself, you know, and the jury deliberated for, you know, something like 25, 30 minutes. I mean, they all had their mind made up. It wasn't, but I spent a month in court. I started getting up in the morning and going to the gym and swimming because they don't start until 9 o'clock every day. I was like a caged animal at 7 o'clock in the morning because I'm usually working. I would go swim laps in the Y, you know, just to burn off some energy. I did that for a month. But I remember walking out of the, you know, getting the verdict and saying to myself, you know, I'm not going to quit medicine, but if I ever did, it would be for this reason. You know, medical malpractice is a big stress that I don't think that we talk about as much. And then the last item that you know, really is a setup for anyone is, you know, boredom with routine. And those of us who do a lot of surgery, you know, it's hard to get bored doing a rhinoplasty, right? It's hard to get bored doing a facelift, but we do get bored listening to our patients. I mean, if I had to go 12 hours a day or 10 hours a day just seeing patients and trying to be social and talk about the same old thing, I mean, I look at, God bless pediatricians, you know, I look at them, do well, baby, 99% of their, you know, people are healthy and you're talking about the same thing every day. I mean, just stick pins in my eyes, right? I would be out of my mind doing it. So, you know, boredom sets us up for burnout because the excitement isn't there any longer. So, you know, I think that people that do insurance-based medicine, because of the frustration, you know, they're at even higher risk than the rest of us. So I just named 10 items that put us at extremely high risk, you know, for burnout. Again, what are the differences in medicine? Because there, let's face it, some specialties that are a lot higher risk. I mean, I remember talking to a cardiac surgeon once, and he said, "You guys have no idea." He goes, "You know, I leave the OR every day. He does 2 hearts a day, and I'm on eggshells all night. I can't go out for dinner and have a glass of wine." And you know, those of us who do facelifts, it's kind of like that too. I mean, you know, you do a couple facelifts a day, and you go home and you think about it, and you never know when one of them is going to be a hematoma. So. I think that you know, insurance-based medicine has its share over functional. I mean, I think in aesthetic medicine, at least, you know, people willingly pay us for our services. And then, of course, as I mentioned, there are differences between specialties. You know, I remember looking at ENT and general surgery, and I think that you could burn out very easily in general surgery. At least when I was looking at ENT, I'm like, these guys all and women all seem to be happy. And it seemed to be a happy specialty. You know, demographics is another difference. You know, older physicians are more likely to remember medicine the old way. It's funny because I talk to my daughter about burnout, and she says, well, Dad, my generation doesn't know any different. This is what we've learned. So I think that, because I've talked to, what is that? I heard something like 50% of physicians in the next few years are going to be over 55. So, those of us who have done it one certain way can remember and maybe be a little bit more frustrated than others. So, and then when you talk about aesthetic medicine, it's more of an entrepreneurial field, and entrepreneurs, believe it or not, have a high rate of burnout. Again, many of them don't have a high job fit, but they vest highly into their business. They're passionate about it, and they have a mindset to be driven. These things are all linked highly to burnout. Why? Because they have uncertainty. They take a lot of risk. So, what do you do about this? I believe what's important for those of us, because the cost is big. I mean, right? The cost is big. If you could have a 15-year career and be burned out, or have a 30 or 35-year career and be fulfilled, that's a big cost to be burned out. Doesn't it behoove us to be intentional about structuring or engineering something to prevent that? And the other cost is, failed marriages, relationships with kids, because, you can't be a good dad, you can't be a good spouse when you're miserable. And I've seen a couple of my colleagues, this way. So, on the other side of things, there's, happiness and fulfillment. And I think that it needs to be a very intentional effort to do so. Those people who are entrepreneurs are kind of a setup too, at high risk, because anyone knows Strategic Coach? They're a coaching organization. And I kind of toyed with Strategic Coach for a few years, but I remember there was one thing that I was fascinated by, and I really try to think about this on a regular basis. Entrepreneurs or high achievers tend to focus on the gap. Okay, what does that mean? And what they try to teach in Strategic Coaches, don't focus on the gap. The gap, for those of us that are high achievers, is where we are compared to where we think we should be. And it's more important to focus on what you've accomplished and think about that versus just focus on your deficiency. Like, we those of us, right, we're pretty competitive. So people who are entrepreneurs who start a business, they hear about someone doing a little bit better, and we all kind of feel like we're imposters to some degree. So I think a Strategic Coach had a system that you go through so you teach yourself not to focus on the gap. And as I mentioned, if we get this wrong and we are burned out, like some of my colleagues, I've seen people who are just absolutely miserable I had a buddy of mine who's a urologist. He called me up. He's 60 years old. He called me up about 2 years ago, and his practice was taken over by the healthcare system. And he said, Ed, I used to see, I forget the number, 15, 30 patients in an afternoon. Now I see, 20, and I'm there till 6:37. He goes, I need out. I need to get out of this. He goes, do you have anything I can do over there? He said, I know you're do this marketing stuff. And he goes, I'm thinking maybe I could do like vaginal tightening or something. He goes, I've heard of this stuff. He goes, but that's a bad state of it. And I said to him, Zach, why don't you just quit? He says, Ed, I'm not in a position financially to just quit right yet. Isn't that an awful, think about the stakes there. He's unhappy. He's not being fulfilled. You can't tell me that he's, happy at home. So, what can one do to overcome this? And it's something that I think I do a pretty good job. And that's to be almost fanatical about your time and your time management. If you think about it, so, go to these time management things. And I went to a few of them once because my parents had a real estate company. And I think I was between college and medical school, and I went to one to kind of, and I think, let's face it, those of us who go through our training get pretty good at time management, right? We wouldn't survive if we weren't. But you talk about this guy got up one day and he said, what is time? And, you're going around the room and he's soliciting things and people go, of course, time is money, right? And he said, no, you're missing the point. Time is your life. Time is life. I mean, there's the average American, right? If you live, 80 years is it, 42 million minutes. How many do you really want your time wasted? And the reason why this is so relevant and important, because it comes down to being aware of life-work balance and making sure you have something else other than just working all the time. I go back to priorities, right? One of my fellows said to me, Dr. Poirier, he listens to these sometimes, but I don't think he's on right now. But he said to me once when he was a fellow, he says, Dr. Williams, I think you're the most efficient person I've ever met. He was a Stanford, Harvard person. I said to him, Corey, I don't know if I take that as a compliment. I mean, you're telling me like I'm that obsessed with time, but what it really was, he was trying to compliment me. He says, no, you're so obsessed with, being efficient so that you're out of here. And, and we all know these people who are hospital rats, right? They're hospital rats. And and that's probably why I ended up building the facility I ended up building, because I was out of my mind working in the hospital. We had to shut our OR for some anesthesia issues about a couple months ago. I don't want to get into details. Actually, I'm going to tell this story in an upcoming, the trials and tribulations of a 20-year history running a surgery center. But for about 3 weeks, I had to run across town and do cases. And we finished one case in an ambulatory surgery center, not ours, of course. And the nurse said to me, Dr. Williams, you might as well go get a cup of coffee. She goes, well, we got 15, 20 minutes before instruments are even, coming out. I thought I was going to have a stroke, and the reason why isn't because I'm obsessed with time. It's because I'm obsessed with being home when I can be home. And it's not, my wife never gives me a hard time about anything. It's just that I don't want to waste my life wasting time. So, figuring out your priorities, because I've always said, I said this on the call before, priorities aren't what you say, they're priorities are what you do. And so the first time, I started to really get intentional when I was run ragged around 2004 or 5, 15 years or so ago. I started to say, what is it that's not important to me? What is it that's not going to make an impact? And take those things and get them off your plate. Now, people who know me, I did a lot with our academy, and that was important to me for a period of time. And my family certainly is my number one. But let me just tell you, when I first got in practice, I was on, board for the American Cancer Society, and I would say yes to this and say yes to that, and then I would start to get, finally you're reaching burnout, right? And so what I started to do was to become very intentional. And my criteria is if I can't be involved with something that I can actually make an impact, a significant impact, I don't want to do it. I remember once, so I was one of the founding directors of the Vascular Birthmark Foundation, which is now networked thousands and thousands of kids. We founded that in 1995. I was on that board for about a year and a half. And we used to meet once a month on a Sunday evening. And after about a year, I got off the board. And the reason I got off the board is I thought to myself, you know what? I can't make an impact here on this board. So I got off. So the first thing to do is really start being intentional about getting rid of things that are not important to you and that you can't make an impact. My kids' school, I remember my kids were in a parochial school. I was asked to be on the board, and I thought, you know what, this is important to me, my kids' education. And so I called one of the board members, a friend of mine who was an attorney, and I said to him, Tom, I'm like, so tell me about the board. And he said, well, it's, we have this board and we get together once a month. And, well, Ed, you have to understand, we're more of a consultation board. Father Joe really makes all the decisions. And I said, what do you mean by it? Well, we all weigh in, but there's no, we don't really have a vote on making the decisions. And I made my decision that night that I want nothing to do with this, because I'm like, I'm not going to, if I can't make an impact, because that's one of my criteria, if I can't make an impact on something, and it's not important to me, you get it off your plate. And I did that. I got a whole bunch of stuff off my plate around 2005. And then I started to say, what are things that are important? But I think it's really important for us to, one, say no, but make an intentional effort to set goals. And I actually go through, and I'm going to give a shout out to this guy, Steve Siebold, who really made an impact. He had this program. He'd written a number of books and, personal development, professional development stuff. And I still know he runs a big program down. I think he's down in Atlanta. But it's called, I think it was like this 12 CD series called, bear with me here, I'm blanking on it. Mental Toughness Program. Yeah, that's it. But he talks about setting your 1 and 3 and 5 year goals and being very intentional about how you do this. And I don't want to steal the thunder of this, and I would encourage any of you, but by setting goals, by allocating time for each of these things and being very intentional, you're much more likely to have a well-balanced life. And I started doing this around 2005. And the crazy thing is, you go back and you read the stuff that you wrote 5 years later, it'll give you goosebumps because the stuff happens. There's something very powerful about putting something on paper, committing to it. And so real basically, here's what he does, this exercise he puts you through. And I actually run a business development group, and I've done this at our retreat for a number of my colleagues. And people say it's the most impactful thing that they've ever done. And I can't take the credit for it. This was Steve Siebold's work. And I think it goes back to, that old book that was written in the 40s, like Think and Grow Rich, but it's Nathaniel, I'm blanking on his name. But what he does is he has you put out, I think there's 8 or 9 categories. I'm going to tell you what they are, and then you set goals in these categories. For example, 1 is faith, spiritual. Number 2 is your family. Number 3 is your friends. Number 4 are finances. Number 5 is business, career planning. Number 6 is fitness. The next item is recreation. And then there's social, cultural, giving back category as well that can be used. And I'm gonna go through some of these and how you can structure these kind of things. So, for example, I don't want to assume anything, but whether people are, spiritual or whatever in your faith, what is important to you in that category? I mean, there's those of us who, I can get to church every week now. And that's something that's important to me. It's hard when you're different phases of life and you got kids. So, one of the things I do is, and I'm going to get to this too, as far as one of the things that makes you appreciate what you have is going through a routine and being very grateful. And I try to think every single morning. I pour my cup of coffee and I go out and I go right down the list, because these are some of these intentional things that help you avoid burnout. If you really sit there and you think about the things that you need to be, you're grateful for, it's pretty impressive. Next item, talk about family. What are things that are important to you, and then you set goals. I mean, those of us who, for me, I have a date night with my wife once a week, and I do what she wants to do. She likes to watch movies, so I'll force myself to watch movies. Friends, what's important to do with friends. I mean, those of us, my one daughter said to me once, you don't have a lot of friends, Dad. Well, when I go to our society meetings, that's all my buddies, right? But most of the time between work and kids, I don't have a lot left over. Finances, setting goals. What are your financial goals? What is it that makes you happy? And then going through planning for, a career and personal development and those type of things. Are we really, are we intentionally doing things, or are we just responding to our work? Setting fitness goals. and recreation fun. I mean, for me, I went through a period of time where I was way into horses and fox hunting. I have a lot of outside. I have a lot of outside. Hey, we'll see you. We'll see you, John. Um, anyway, a lot of outside things that I'm fascinated with, and I think these are important things to be very intentional about. For example, right now I'm becoming a pilot. I'm fascinated with aviation. Intentionally doing this, I think it's very easy for us to get caught up in the whole work thing, and then social and cultural. To me, giving is very very important. And I talked, it's easy as we get into, early careers, we're getting hit up by people all over the place, and what I would encourage you to do is pick one or two things that are important to you and stick with them. A buddy of mine said to me once, and this is kind of what I do, for us, it's one of my kids' schools, capital campaign at our church, city mission, some of these things, and really give to them, because there's really no better feeling for doing this. How do you select these things? I think it's important to, look at the financials, make a decision, and then, you have other things that hit you up, you $100 here, go away. And, but there's a lot of good feelings that come from giving to things, and not being, just giving to everything. So in these different categories that Steve Siebold has you go through, he has you write not just goals, but also a very detailed description, like you're writing a letter to a friend, and you're writing it in the future, and you're writing it to say, listen, in the past 5 years, this is what's happened. And you're supposed to write as much detail as you possibly can. And you write down as much and why this makes you feel good. The emotions associated with it. For example, I want to be my high school weight. I want to be 160 pounds. I want to be, why is it important? Because I know I'll feel so much better about myself. And now that I've been doing this, I feel so much better about myself, and I can be able to keep up with my family and ski and do all, active and hike and all that other stuff. Again, I go back to the same thing. Having a very balanced life and avoiding burnout is something that has to be intentional, I believe, because it's very easy to just be in a rut and working and chasing the revenue in your business. So the other thing, as I mentioned, and I think this is something that I have learned from people who have been very humble and very, grateful, are a routine of gratitude. And if you really, again, if you do it on a regular basis, for me, it's every morning. I get up at about 5:15. I go pour a cup of coffee and I go out on our deck, and I just kind of think about, all the things I have to be grateful. I go right down the list, the ability, the fact that I'm ambitious, the fact that I've got, a wife who cares about me. And I just think of each one of my kids. I think about, what I've accomplished instead of focusing on the gap, because it's very demoralizing when you're focusing on what you think you should have accomplished, or where you need to be, as opposed to what you've accomplished. You can think about what you've accumulated financially over the years. You can think about the assets you have if you're so inclined to do so. You can think about just having the time, being healthy. For me, I look at the sun coming up because I look at the east. I'm like, just being able to, enjoy this in the morning. A lot of people are in the middle of a city somewhere, and all they hear is city traffic, and I have this beautiful view that I look at. So I think that's one thing that I've done in addition to real personal development, strategic planning. So we do our business strategic planning, and I'm going to talk about that, but personal development, strategic planning. So my efforts are very deliberate. And it keeps you focused on what's important versus just, working for a living, and those kind of things are important. And being aware of the whole burnout thing, and realizing that those symptoms, if you're starting to have them, are, potentially real. It's still astounding to me when I was looking at the research that almost 1 in 2 physicians consider themselves, burned out. My summary here is that we can't afford not to think about this or be intentional about it, especially when you look at the statistics of physician burnout. My goal is that, I show up at the end of life empty. I want to have as much fun as possible. I want to learn as many things as possible. I want to have a lot of outside interests. I think that our older generation, the generation above me, really didn't have a lot of outside interests. And so, there's that piece of it. And the other thing is, why is this so important? Because the stakes are so high. On one contrast, you're unhappy and you're miserable 15 years in practice and bored or 20 years. On the other end of things, you're happy, fulfilled, and you can have a long, productive career. It's not about a sprint. It's about the marathon. And I believe that, reflecting on my life and times that I've felt, because I have, there have been times when I felt burned out. I got rid of things I don't want to do. Unfortunately, when certain things you've done them, you feel like you've mastered them. And especially if you have a little bit of an entrepreneurial spirit, it's very easy to get burned out and get bored of what you're doing. So again, you can have, I think it's more important to have a 30-year marathon career of fulfillment than it is to just, get out there and work. And as I mentioned, gratitude is another very important thing. And then giving, giving of your, I talked about giving, but that is one of those things that if you think about Steve Gates and you think about some of these, extremely wealthy people, billionaires, the last many years of their life, they obsess over their giving strategies. And I think the reason they do is because it is that rewarding. The last many years, I've made my giving, as I mentioned earlier, very, very intentional. And I got to tell you, there's nothing that is more fulfilling than feeling like you made an impact financially on something that you've done. And then giving your time. To me, giving my time really comes down to the next generation. One of our residents thanked me this past week for helping them out, really thanked me in the research project. And we were just so grateful. And I said, I only have one thing to tell you, and that is you pass it on. And when you're giving of your time, helping other people, you never get tired of that. You may get bored seeing patients, but you're not going to be, you're not going to be burned out. It's hard to be burned out when you're just helping people. It's very, very fulfilling and gratifying. So that's, to me, why it's so important to make life work balance intentional. I would encourage anyone listening to this I don't know if they still make it, Steve Siebold's, what was it? His book on the mindset, which is basically mental toughness. I think it was mental toughness mastery, but go through those things and it helps you focus yourself to become more balanced. I think that's really all I have now. Like I said, if anyone has any questions, I do find this fascinating and a really, really important topic, especially with, young physicians. And I'm concerned about our younger generation of physicians because they do have so much more regulation and compliance things that creates frustration for them. Next month, as I mentioned, I'm going to talk about either effective strategic planning, or I'm going to have Alex Thirst, who's a founder and director of the American Medical Spa Association, the Med Spa Association. He is an attorney, and because last month we talked about how to scale up with nurse injectors, this gentleman's going to weigh in. I've got a bunch of questions I want to ask him because he knows all the differences in regulations in the different states. If I don't see any questions pop up here, Lila, I think we're at the end of our time. Any
Yes,
questions?
there's no questions so far. I have added the link to the Facebook group that Dr. Williams mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. I've also put up the link to his new website, and I'm posting the link for feedback. We love it when we hear feedback from everybody.
Yeah. Anything you want to hear more of, or anything you want to hear that I haven't covered, questions, I try to answer the questions throughout the podcast. I also try, if there's a hangover question from last month, I'll always bring that, I'll bring that up as well. So if I don't see any questions, I'm going to sign off. I really appreciate people listening to this. I'm flattered that we've had, like I said, almost 500 people listening to this each month. And I hope you have an awesome month, and look forward to getting together with everyone again on July 18th.
And I'll go ahead and put up the link so that you can listen to the past episodes.
Yes. Yeah, for anyone I mean, there are very few people that actually listen to this live, but we have a lot of people going back and listening to it after the fact. So, and again, if you get something out of it, I hope you share it with your friends. We all know, people in the industry that are trying to figure this stuff out. The other thing is, these podcasts, I talk about the business of aesthetic medicine. This is really entrepreneurism 101 for any business. I just happen to be a physician, so I can relate more to physicians. But the things that I'm covering here, when we talk about how to build a high performance team, strategic planning, it relates to every single business that you know. So if you have anyone you think might benefit, I'd really appreciate it if you share it. It's what keeps this podcast free. And again, I want to thank Equal Marketing for hosting this and promoting it and getting it out there.